Well, for a while out there, it looked as if things might be different. Max Verstappen, in first practice at Monaco, had a glitchy clutch and was complaining throughout the session of the ride heights being too low, particularly at the back. They did a little bit of a fix halfway through, but it wasn't enough. And so we were left in a bit of a quandary. Were Ferrari suddenly going to be right there? Carlos Sainz particularly looked really good. Were Mercedes finally getting it together, right up there with Aston Martin? Well, it wasn't long into the second session, which began a little bit later in the day, for us to see that Max Verstappen and Red Bull powertrains back again where we normally expect them. Max brilliantly quick on the soft tyre, on the hard, well, the medium tyre, the race tyre, and also on full tanks right at the end, just after a red flag period brought out by Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, who'd looked really good, matched Charles all day, and then right at the end of the second session had one of those things out of the slow bit of the swimming pool, over the curb and straight into the guardrail. Rather than an innocuous ending, wasn't sideways into Casino Square, it was just one of those things which we've seen many an F3 and an F2 driver do. Needless to say, it will happen again this weekend in Formula One as well. Lots to talk about, lots to cram into this very, very short video. Suffice to say that Red Bull looking very, very good. Fernando Alonso, just a model of consistency and on top of the car, just a drivable car, looked really good into Casino Square, down the hill, into Mirabeau particularly. That's where the Aston Martin's really strong. And Fernando just reeling off lap after lap after lap, getting very annoyed in traffic at people who are not getting out of the way, as he would. You know, he's been around for a while. There's Fernando Alonso in the mirrors. Move over, please. No, he looked really good all day, fabulous. But the big story was, well, two big stories. One, I thought how good Carlos Sainz looked alongside Charles Leclerc today. Charles never looked really comfortable in the car. He was complaining quite a lot in the second session about the thing bouncing around and the brake temperatures. And his corner entries looked quite Carlos Sainz as well. Not quite the Charles Leclerc that probably we're going to see tomorrow. It always takes a little bit of time. Well, I think he does. Miami to one side to get it right for the weekend. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens there. Both Ferrari drivers very, very equal in terms of lap time and very quick around here. You would expect them to be quick for sure. But the big story, as I say, the updates on Mercedes. Shub is going to talk you through those. No better person than an aerodynamicist who spent 2 years on work experience at Red Bull, and he's had a good look at what Mercedes have done with those pods. So I'll hand it over to Shub very quickly. But suffice to say that Lewis Hamilton looked really good, looked like a racing driver, talking about traffic, talking about this and how far away he was from the Red Bulls. George Russell probably went in a slightly different direction. Shub suggests that as well. And there was a lovely moment actually right at the beginning of the first session. George spent quite a lot of time in the garage, and when he eventually got out, he got on the radio in his very explicit way and said, the back's all over the place going into Casino Square through that top of the hill bit. And they said, so we need to, so the front's too strong then, George. And classic George, which is a classic engineer thing. Oh, well, you know, in that case, it can't be that the rear is out of grip. It's got to be that the front is over gripped. So George says, no, the back end needs more grip. Lovely moment in the development of a new car. So let's just have a look at the times very quickly, what they did in the second session. You can see there, everybody ran the medium tyre just to get the car set up, apart from the Ferrari drivers who are out on the hard tyre, so that needs to be taken into account. But Max 13.3, Sergio Perez 13.6 eventually got there. The two Ferrari drivers, pretty good, as I say, on the hard tyre, 13.8. And Fernando Alonso and the two Mercedes, virtually inseparable. The Aston Martin looks to be a more drivable car, which you would expect given the amount of experience they have with that car now. But Mercedes must be thinking, wow, you know, we have a bit of a race car here, finally. And Alpine in there with Esteban Ocon 14.0 and Kevin Magnussen again looking good in the Haas. And then they went out on soft tyres. That little cameo was foreshortened by Carlos hitting the guardrail out of the swimming pool, as I say. But there Max did a 12.4, Charles Leclerc 12.5, Carlos Sainz 12.5, Fernando Alonso 12.6, and Lando Norris really good in the McLaren 12.9. Excellent lap, I thought. So you can either say Mercedes really competitive again, or you could say, well, they're just as quick or as slow as a McLaren. Who knows where we are. Sergio Perez didn't really do a lot today. Took a while to get settled in. 12.9, as you can see, half a second slower than Max there. Traffic for sure. Valtteri Bottas, another good lap in the Alfa Romeo, and this time it was Pierre Gasly going well for Alpine. Right at the end, after the red flag brought up by Carlos, it was about 7 minutes to go. And no surprise to see Max immediately putting on the medium tyre and putting fuel in the car just to get a bit of homework done. Fernando Alonso also put fuel in the Aston Martin, but stayed on the soft tyre. So Max is on the medium, Fernando on the soft tyre. Max 16.8, 16.2, 16.6, 16.3, 16.4, 16.4, 16.2, 15.8. How's that for consistency on a Monaco that was crammed with cars? Obviously, when they're running slightly longer runs, the traffic isn't a major drama. It was really bad when they're on the soft tyre, but a really impressive run again by Max with fuel in the car. And Fernando Alonso, by contrast, on the soft tyre, 17.1, 16.9, and then an anomaly of 15.3. I mean, if he did that 15.3 with fuel in the car, wow, that is a really quick time. But then the others would suggest that maybe that's a dodgy time. 17.4, 17.1, and then 34.9, 20.2 in traffic. Lewis Hamilton, comparison, he was on the medium tyre, same as Max Verstappen, 17.1, 16.3, 16.5, 17.1. So sort of Fernando Alonso territory as well. Fernando a little bit quicker, but then he was on the soft tyre. George Russell 16.5 as well. So Mercedes will be coming out of this thinking, yeah, we probably made a step in the right direction here. But for more on that, let's see what Shub Sangodkar thinks.
Mercedes did not really disappoint because, everybody expected Mercedes to maybe just try and copy paste the side pods. But as you expect from a quality team like Mercedes, they've come up with their own version of the wide side pod philosophy. Now, what is their own version? So they did not ditch the mid wing or the cis tube wing that we so call as the mid wing, and they've gone ahead and integrated this mid wing with the side pods and also added some vertical cascade like winglet, which is a quite innovative and novel feature of the Mercedes W14B. So let us try and look in detail at some of these components, on top of which they've also brought a new front suspension, and additionally they've also gotten a new floor to basically change their entire aero philosophy per se. So let's first start with the front suspensions, right? So they've come up with an anti-dive suspension setup which has two basic reasons. One is mechanical and one is aerodynamics. The aerodynamic reason is that the suspensions are the bridge between the flow field coming from the front wing going into the floor and onto the side pod. So any big flow philosophy change in terms of aero demands an optimization of the front suspension as well to deliver the desired flow field onto the rear end of the car, which is in this case the floor and the side pods itself. Mechanically, what's happening is quite interesting. So as the name suggests, under braking, what the anti-dive suspension does is reduces the dive of the front end of the car. Now what this allows the car to do is this allows the car to run lower because there is less variability of the pitch of the car under braking, and because it allows the car to run lower, chances are that in these regulations where the floor is very dominant in terms of downforce, you would be able to have run with a higher downforce package, or the floor would be more loaded across a range of conditions as you go through the corner. I mean, why didn't Mercedes think about this to begin with, right? It's not like they don't have smart engineers. They have very capable engineers. But the backdraws of a suspension like an anti-dive suspension is that it reduces the feel of the car to the driver. So it's quite, let's say, it's not very obvious to the driver that the car does not pitch under braking. So it reduces the sensitivity or the dynamic sensitivity that the drivers get, or the feedback that the drivers get from the car as they go through corners. Again, this is not the thing that would basically, close the gap of 2 or 3 tenths to Red Bull, but it is something that maybe fits well with the aero philosophy that the 2023 regulations require, which is namely the wide side pod and the floor being powerful, so providing a stable platform for the floor to perform. So let us talk about the side pods and let us talk about what is novel about them, because in terms of the wide side pod philosophy and what it does, we've spoken about it multiple times, and if you want to know more about it, jump onto my channel and check out some of the videos that I've done about the wide side pod. So just in short, the wide side pod allows you to manage the front wheel wake effectively and also creates a lot of outwash onto the floor edge, which helps in the extraction of the front floor. And this has other benefits also. But what Mercedes have, which is quite novel about them, is that they've integrated the sys tube wing, or the mid wing, so as we call it, onto the wide side pod philosophy. So this gives them tools that other people don't have to play around with. Now this can again be just a limitation of their chassis and that they've worked around it, or it might be a purpose driven feature on the car. Another really interesting bit on the car is a vertical cascaded winglet on the sys tube wing itself. And this is extremely interesting because this is almost like a mini barge board, and it almost breaks some of the ideas that the FIA had in terms of wheel wake management. So it's going to be really interesting if they're able to keep this vertical winglet. I'm pretty sure it must be legal because Mercedes wouldn't introduce it without it being legal. However, whether they're able to keep it on the car, is it within the spirits of the rules? We'll find out. But what these are basically doing is, the vertical winglet will cast off a strong vortex, and the sys tube wing or the mid wing is going to cast off another vortex, and these vortices are going to merge together downstream. And then the idea is that, can you use this vortex to create downwash onto the side wall of the side pod itself, so that you can direct air through the undercut towards the mouse hole and the rear tire area, that small gap between the mouse hole and the rear tire, where there's a lot of it's a very sensitive area because you can feed the diffuser through this place. You can also manage the rear tire squish from this place, and it has a huge impact on the overall diffuser performance. In addition to that, the top part of the side pod is quite conventional. It looks more like an Alpine McLaren type of top side of the side pod, where the gullies are not as aggressive as Aston Martin, but they are present, and then the airflow going through these gullies are targeted to be delivered towards the beam wing, which is again an important part and controls the efficiency aspect of the entire aero philosophy. Let's talk about the floor now, because along with the wide side pod philosophy comes a new floor which complements that wide side pod philosophy. The novel part about it is this vortex generator that is present very close to the chassis. The reason only Mercedes can do this as compared to any other team on the grid is because they came up with this sim side pod design. The chassis were actually smaller than the required volumes in the regulations. So there is this bit in the mid chassis volume wherein basically there are no regulations inside. So if your chassis is slimmer than the volume requires it to be, you can actually put bits like a vortex generator on top of the floor edge, which no other team can account for example. So really interesting feature on that. Now what it's going to do, it's going to create a vortex that will create outwash onto the on top of the floor, which would be useful for them to manage the lower tire wheel wake and also create a lot of extraction from the front floor bit. And this would again be in that same direction of pushing the outwash philosophy of the wide side pod. So it's basically, it's all about managing the tire wheel wake as you go downstream. Coming to the G line, or the intersection between the side pod and the floor top edge, you can see that there's a double kick line, or a double reflex almost, which is again an interesting feature. Like, we would have to do CFD to try and understand what it's really doing, which we might, so stay tuned for that. Now if you look at the floor edge wing, this is gigantic in length, and it's really interesting because Red Bull came up with this idea of really maximizing the length of the floor edge wing, but Mercedes have taken this to the next level. It extends almost along the entire floor edge length, which is a very interesting feature. The way it works is quite not simple, but not very intuitive also. So you have a lot of flow that is coming from the top edge of the floor, and if you are able to seep it underneath, then you can create local suction onto the floor edge. So that is one advantage. In my estimate, it would be at least around 15 to 20 points of downforce, but you have to do again some CFD to figure that out. And also what it does is, because it creates an outwashing vector onto the floor edge, any inwash that is coming from the floor edge itself using that tip vortex, which will eventually happen, is going to be restricted. So it creates like this mini skirt kind of effect that you get along the floor edge, which is very, very important in making sure that you can extract the maximum out of the floor. So this is what the floor edge is doing, and I think it's quite interesting, some really interesting features on the W14V. Well, chances are that the W14 is not going to be a killer at Monaco, because this car has changed mechanically and aerodynamically, and I'm pretty sure Mercedes will try and go in different setup directions to try and understand the car. So don't expect wonders from them, and even if you do see wonders from them, don't expect the same thing in Barcelona. But because Monaco is really not the greatest data point for you to have, the track is really bumpy, so you might not collect the right kind of mechanical data that you want to collect. The ride heights are completely different to a normal track, and even the aero data that you get might not be the cleanest because of the traffic equation. So Monaco, not the best place to introduce the update, but they need to give a feel to the drivers about the concept, and I think that's why they've still gone for it. So in terms of when Mercedes would have started in kind of building or redirecting their resources towards the W14V, I think Andrew Shovlin quite clearly said it, that after the Bahrain testing and after the Bahrain race, they knew that they had to take a big step forward and their current concept would not be able to do it. So I think after Bahrain is when they literally started. And what does this mean for this year's budget? I mean, it takes a huge chunk of their budget out, but it is worth spending that budget in understanding the car this year, like the rest half of the season, so that next year when they come up with the car, they can go all in terms of what they want to do and the development plan for next year. I mean, it's a compromise for Mercedes, but it's good to start now as they've got that direction quite early on from Bahrain itself, rather than starting, let's say, in Barcelona, understanding, no, we have to ditch this car and we have to start with a new concept. So they are still using this year's budget on this year's car, but it has taken some hit, but not too much, I would say.